Aloha, I'm Mike Story with Hawaii Health at Work Alliance, a UHA health insurance company, and I'll be your moderator today. Welcome to our webinar, How Do We Adapt Together Now and Beyond? This webinar is brought to you by UHA Health Insurance, Hawaii Health at Work Alliance, Hawaii Employers Council, and Hawaii Business Magazine. I'm happy you are here with us today to participate in a discussion about adapting together in an uncertain and honestly sometimes divided environment. Our four incredible panelists are thought leaders and will help elevate this discussion for us. You can read their full bios on our event website, but because we want to dive right into the questions, I'm only going to provide their name and company. We encourage you throughout the webinar to participate by asking questions in the questions feature, not the chat feature. That may seem counterintuitive, but it will allow us an easier way to manage audience questions. It'll be more efficient. We've already begun receiving questions actually, and we've pre-selected a few to help guide our discussion today. So let's get started. Here are our panelists: Sarah Gay from HEMIC, Dalen Yanagita from Hogan Consulting, Robin Kobayashi from Hawaiian Airlines, and our community connector, Pono. Thank you, panelists, for joining us. Let me start the conversation by saying it would be naive to think that what's going on in the outside world wouldn't have an impact inside our workplace. The heightened tensions from global pandemic, our shifting economy, politics, social inequality, injustice, among others, will definitely show themselves if they haven't already. So our well-being, our work environment, professional relationships, employee engagement, and company performance are all at stake. So this division in society could lead to division at work, but it doesn't have to. So Pono, I wanted to start the questions by posing this first one to you. What is the business case for adapting together now and beyond?
Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, aloha, everyone. Gosh, what a tough question. So as you folks probably know, if you've heard me talk before, I'm a storyteller, and I share stories to kind of unlock what people already know rather than put it on top of them. And so in 2010, there was a function that I was invited to, much like this. The East-West Fellows program, which goes every year for international leaders coming together for a year, 6 months together at the East-West Center, and then 6 months virtual. Had invited a few leaders to come and speak with that cohort. And there was a similar question which was posed to me with this group and all the leaders. And the question was, how can we or do we balance the for-profit objectives of companies with the nonprofit objectives of communities? And so what I did was I asked a question, and I'd like you folks all to think of your answer. I asked the question, how many of you have had personal crisis or crisis in your personal life that affected your professional life? So please raise your hand. And everyone in the audience raised their hand. And then I asked, when we design our processes, our policies, our business cases, our logic models, do we design them for people being sick or operating at their highest potential? And I know the answer. The answer is they're designed for people operating at their highest potential all the time. And then I asked the question, so what if tomorrow the whole world were sick? And that was my way to answer that question. Did I know 10 years ago the whole world would be, then 10 years later the whole world would be sick? I mean, that's where we find ourselves today. And it's that tension and that balance between the two of the significance of people with also the importance of business. But it's that tension, and I think that in the past few years, the focus has been so driven on the profit side of business as people are just the tools of that. And that's become a universal picture, I think, that we in America have adopted. And now we're finding ourselves in this place, Mike, of recognizing the significance of business is based on the people and their health and well-being. So that's hopefully that provides some context to your question, Mike. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Pono. Sarah, Dalen, Robin, do you guys have anything to add to what Pono said?
I'd like to add, I think sometimes that question is posed as a dichotomy. Do we need to focus on people or results? And I think there's a lot of value in thinking of those not as polarized sides, but instead the relationship may actually be causal, right? If we focus on the people and we focus on the connection and the culture first, the results come. So rather of them thinking of which one do I need to focus on, focusing on one and then being assured the results come, I think that's another way of thinking at it as well. It's not about one or the other, it's both. And if you focus on one as the foundation, the other comes.
So, like I mentioned at the beginning to all the audience members, please participate with your questions in the questions feature on your toolbar. We do have our first question from Robert. Robert, can I ask you to come on mic and ask your question to the panelists?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. Kind of piggybacking off of what you were just saying, Pono, in regards to business development. My question is, how do we go about in these transactional dealings without seeming too opportunistic or insensitive to COVID?
That's for you, ladies. Let's hear your answers.
Hi, thanks for the question. The word transactional and HR somehow always find its way together. It's true that, a lot of what we do does have to be transactional. In my work, I work with a lot of small businesses, and COVID has brought about transaction for them that they were never aware of. For large employers, we've always dealt with a lot of technical laws and policies about what employees can do and cannot do and what they're eligible for and not eligible for. But for a lot of small employers, from one employee to 20, 19, a lot of those rules don't apply. But what COVID did was it opened that up to smaller employers, and my clients were completely caught off guard. And because our employees are well informed, they're coming to us saying, well, what about the FFCRA, and I'm entitled to leave if my child's school is closed, and that's my legal right. And so a lot of small employers were dealing with transaction that they weren't familiar with, and because they weren't familiar with it, when they respond, they felt as though their employees were attacking them in a way. And what my clients have found to be best is be transparent, that, hey, you know what, this is new to me too, and we're working through it. And what we understand is this is the purpose of this transaction and where it'll end up. And I think what it helped them was to set the expectation about what the process is, even though a lot of times when we know the transaction, we don't talk through it because we just know it inherently. But a lot of my small business clients have found that if they share with the employee that, hey, I'm working through this, and this is what I understand about it, and that this is what I understand we have to do, it kind of helped to soften that up. I'd love to hear, Sarah, Robin, what you folks have experienced with transaction.
Definitely.
Thanks, Dalen. I think you're exactly right. HR inherently could be considered transactional. Paying people through payroll is a transaction. Making sure that people have their health insurance is a transaction. It's seen as a transaction, but it really is something that is crucial and fundamental that I think we really took for granted prior to COVID. I would say, to answer the question and to follow on what Daylin was saying, I think what's really critical right now, more than ever, is communication. There are just things that are going to happen, like payroll has to happen, health insurance, 401k deductions and loans, they have to happen. Those are transactional. But making decisions about certain things, for instance, having to lay people off, having to put people on furlough, those are also transactions, but they have huge life impacts on people. And I think, to answer your question about how do we go about doing business without making it feel transactional and making people understand why we're doing things, transactions are a component of things that occur, or hopefully, when you're thinking of it, an objective that you're trying to achieve that is in the best interest of your employees, your stakeholders, and your clients or customers. And I think as long as you are, now more than ever, it's important to communicate to your employees and your customers and your stakeholders why you're making the choices you're making, why you're doing the things that you're doing. What is that greater objective that you're seeking? And I think in that way, it makes the little items that lead up to that end result less transactional, more meaningful, especially now when people are looking for leadership.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, Robin. Go ahead, Sarah.
I'd like to share a story, actually, that just recently happened. I received an email about an employee who was having some challenges on some transactions, on some reports that were incorrect. And this is an employee who normally has awesome performance, an up-and-comer. And so I just sat down and met with him, and we started talking, and I just said, "So, how are you doing?" And he says, "Oh, I'm kind of worried. I feel like I'm making some mistakes on some reports." And I listened, and I said, "So how are you doing in the big picture?" And he went on. He talked a little bit about stress at work and work-life balance and how he was feeling really conflicted. And the more I listened, the more his whole face started to change, and he started talking about how remote work had been really challenging for him because he had a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old at home. And he was really feeling like he was failing as a father. And it really went into this whole discussion about feeling like he wasn't succeeding anywhere. And that his feeling of failure at home and his feeling of failure at work were keeping him from hitting send on emails. He was double checking, triple checking his work, but the errors were still being made. And he was lost. And through the course of that conversation, we started talking about mistakes, and we started talking about what was important to him in his work and how he might be able to get past this feeling of failure, as thinking about those as learning opportunities. And he came up with an amazing plan for how he's going to work on those transactions and a checklist. And through that conversation, my point is, he came up with a plan, but it was a plan based on figuring out how to help all of him, not just the transactions in the report. And so I'm not suggesting that we all need to become therapists, or but the point is, he's a human being who was really struggling with more than just the transaction. And by allowing him to recognize and bring all of that to the discussion, helped him get through and figure out his own solution. And I think about an alternative approach of just, writing him up because he was messing up some reports would not have allowed him the opportunity to grow in the way that he figured out on his own through that communication and conversation. So I just share that as thinking about transactions a little bit differently.
Hey, Mike, I'm just going to piggyback just real quickly on what the 3 ladies said. Robert, thanks so much for that question. All of these ladies know, and folks at UHA, that my model is connection versus correction, and that so much of what we do today is based on correction. And what Sarah was just talking about really is how do we connect with people? And I'm just going to give you an example. We as an organization, a collective, established something called the Aloha Connects Innovation Program. And this is to help people who have been displaced because of COVID-19 to find a new pathway to careers. And that's how Dalen and I met personally. And one of the instructions that I gave the team was every phone call and every inquiry to the program comes to 4 of us, but I'm the one who answers it. And the reason why is because this is not about just getting people into jobs. People have been treated like cattle and they're hurting. And the first thing we need to help them to know is that they're seen and they're special. And so every email reply for the inquiries into the program was, thank you so much for seeing our program and considering it as an option for your future. Which is so the opposite, I think, of what most people. They let them know that they're human beings who have options and they're considering our program. That's what when we talk about transactional versus relational. Because how are we helping the quality of people to show up based on that first question that I asked? How do you balance that tension? Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, Pono, that's great. How do you balance the tension? And it's also about resilience, and resilience can be seen as a skill. And there's a question from our audience: in what ways can we help build resilience in the workplace?
I think Robin, go ahead. Because resilience comes as a result to me of struggle and embracing it. And I can only imagine. I know, not only imagine. I know some of the struggles that you folks have had to endure at Hawaiian.
Yeah, resilience. I mean, I don't want to go on and on about me or Hawaiian Airlines, but I have to say the people in our company always astound me in such remarkable ways, because this company has been through so much. We've been through 2 bankruptcies, we're now going through COVID. We were literally not flying for several months and actually losing more money than we were making for a long stretch. And yet the spirit of our people remain unbroken. And I think that is because whenever I ask someone, whether they come from the mainland or they work at, live and grew up in Hawaii, like, why do they love working at Hawaiian Airlines? And they always say 2 things. They say because of each other, and the friendships that they've made. And then we have employees who've worked here. We have these employee recognition banquets, and it's always fun because it's like, okay, 40-year employees, 50-year employees, 60-year employees. And it's just so lovely to see that. And the other is really, they feel so connected to something bigger than themselves. And for some people who aren't familiar with, I think this spirit of, feeling connected the way we do to our family and our community, I think for many of them, they can't really put their finger on it. I think for people who do work here, I think it is this idea that there's something greater than ourselves that we all hope for and that we love to be a part of. And I think those things really provide us with resilience, because when we ourselves as individuals feel like, and many times during 2020, I'm sure many of us have felt this way, where it's just full of despair and darkness. It's nice to know that you have other people that you can count on, even though they might also be feeling like they're in despair and darkness, but knowing that you're in it together somehow brings, I think, a lot of light and levity and hope that you can continue to trudge on. And we certainly have felt that for a long period of time, especially when we weren't flying.
Yep.
Roman, thank you. Our questions are rolling in from the audience. There's another follow-up question, and I think it touches on what Sarah was mentioning when it came to communication when you're communicating with your employee. And the question is, how do we maintain transparent communication while working remotely?
When we first went to remote work in March, one of the things I was so proud of our employees and how quickly they adapted, and our team really just jumped into action, and it was like almost business as usual within a few days. And we had a meeting with the managers early on and said, you know, let's make sure we stay connected, which means you're going to need to meet with your people once a week, have these check-ins, and we tried to put some real structure around what communication and connection would look like for managers and transparency. But what we found over time was it's less about the quantity and more about the quality. And the quality really comes from curiosity and asking questions and asking what's on people's minds. And that's one of my favorite questions. It's just what's on your mind versus coming with preordained agendas and just checking in and seeing how people are doing. I think we worry a lot about transparency when we're concerned around uncertainty. And I guess for me, the best thing to be able to do there is just sometimes be able to say, I don't know, and I'll try to find out. And when I do, I'll let you know what I can. And just being okay with that and comfortable with that. Others?
Quite often I believe people use the term transparency often as a tool against people rather than a guide for myself. And I just believe, Mike, just for myself, that I have to continuously earn the confidence and the trust of people I work with, whether it's my bosses, my board, the folks that I serve, my staff. I don't take that for granted. When I was, so folks, I'm a kidney donor. I gave a kidney to a friend 7 years ago. And I learned that I needed to earn the confidence of my friend, that he could accept this gift and I wouldn't lessen my life one bit. And so I had to earn it. It was not about being his hero or the savior, but it was earning his confidence that he could accept a gift without it destroying my life. So there was not an exchange of lives. And that's why I think, when we talk about transparency, that's not for somebody else to me. It's for me, so that I can continue to earn that transparency and that trust with others.
Thanks, Pono. We're going to go to our audience. Tempsy had a question. Tempsy, would you be willing to come on video and turn on your audio to ask a question? Hi, Tempsy.
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. How are you?
Hi.
Hi. So with everything you guys are talking about, I would just love to hear more ideas on creating or maintaining overall company culture while we're working remote, while things are very up in the air and people are in dark places or listening to the news or watching the news too much maybe, and just everything going on, and it's a different workplace, regardless if some people are working remote, everyone's working remote, whatever that case might be, just different ideas. We've tried different things, but if you guys have any ideas of how you can create or maintain company cultures in this time, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thanks, Tempsy. I think I'll try to answer that question. Company culture is so important, and it's something that I think inherently, at least here at Hawaiian, we're used to doing in person. And so as we look, it can be intentional, it can be unintentional. And I would say that the sort of organic culture that your company has is an important starting point, because I think if you're working against that, it's very, very difficult to do remotely entirely. We're looking at how do we maintain our culture when so many people are working remotely and we have other people who have to come into work every day. And I think there are a couple of things that were really helpful in this regard. And I think the first is really doing exactly what Pono was saying, is rather than looking at our interactions as transactions, to the extent possible, really trying to connect with one another. And I know it's hard because at least what we found on our end is our days are filled with even more emails because we don't get to have that random hallway conversation. And we spend so much of our days on Teams that by 4 o'clock, all of us have like blue light fatigue. So it's really hard to feel and want and to remember to be connected to each other. So I think you actually have to make it intentional. You have to remind yourselves to do it. You need to carve out parts of your team meetings. We call it setting the table or feedback table, where it's just sort of a, hey, let's just talk about what we're feeling and what we're thinking about and what's bugging us right now, as a moment to connect. You know, and I think as COVID hopefully makes its way out of this world, fingers crossed, and you know, remote work continues, I do think that there are going to have to be other intentional moments where we can bring people together to physically connect as well as mentally and spiritually.
I agree with Robin wholeheartedly that it has to be intentional. And I have a story to share about my former boss, Cora Tejas. I've admired her and considered her a mentor for so long, and I had the privilege of working with her. And she's always busy. She's always got multiple things going. She's a CEO of a small business, and she's managing boards, and she's always she's an entrepreneur. She's just an amazing person that's always very busy. And when we went to work from home, we prior to COVID, we had a weekly one-on-one. But when we went to work from home, all of a sudden, Cora packed her schedule with Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call with her employees. And the intentional part that resonated with me, Robin, was for Cora, there are a lot of things that we had to talk about project-wise and look forward. But she always started the conversation by asking, so how you doing? And it wasn't just a, how are you doing? It was authentic. She really meant it. And that spoke volumes to me and to so many others when we were almost grieving in-person interaction, grieving the loss of in-person interaction. And sometimes, so she would book the hour, and sometimes we would talk for 45 minutes about things that were impacting me, and whether it was personal, whether it was business, whether it was philosophical, whether it was political, anything was okay. And she was present. And that really helped me remain connected. And I feel that that's a part of the company culture, is it's authenticity just all the time.
Dalen, that was a really interesting comment. It sounds like the leaders themselves are saddled with moving the business forward, right, in this uncertain world. And with that is not only bringing in money to keep the company going, but also connecting with the employees and moving the company forward. There's two questions I want to get to because they both relate to culture. And the first one is interesting. It's, in today's world, can we consider culture a moving target?
So I would say yes, because I think one definition of culture that I really like is how things really get done at a company. And so if we think about this world of disruption that we're in, then it absolutely has to change, right? Because how we're getting things done is changing all the time. And that requires how we lead to change, right? And so I think for managers to just kind of accept that, and leaders to think about not only have the transactions changed, but the nature of the relationships are changing too. And that may take us thinking a little bit differently and more deeply about the value of relationships in the business.
And then Dalen, getting back to what you were mentioning with your boss and how she continually connected, a follow-up question from our audience is, what is a good amount of time to check in on the employees and their family to make sure they're okay? And are there certain warning signs that we should be looking for?
I think the answer to that question comes from being authentic, because if you are the leader checking in, you would get a sense of maybe I should check in day after tomorrow, or you know, family member is in the hospital. Maybe I should back off a little bit and give them some space and check in, you know, at the end of the week. So I think it's really situational. And while yes, we all have to make schedules and plans, and you know, we can book weekly one-on-ones. I think part of the authenticity is personalizing the connection.
Hey, Mike, I'd like to add on to Dalen sharing that authenticity and that sensitivity. You know, I've got quite a few number of students. Sarah's one of them, and they have this rolling discussion about how does he know when to call and what, and maybe Sarah can expand what I needed, and Sarah, you can expand, and then I'm just gonna jump on your back after you share that perspective of that.
Yeah, Pono, we joke about, but it's not a joke, that he has this gift for just reaching out just when you needed to, or you'll be in a meeting with him and then he'll call right after just to check in and say hi. And it's this, so I've asked, what is it? And it's this incredible, he notices, he sees, pays attention on a level that most of us do not. And being on the receiving end of that feels like you have been seen and valued in a way that it doesn't matter if we could go months without talking and then he calls and it matters, versus a weekly, the transaction of a weekly one-on-one check-in. So I would say it's the power of seeing and listening deeply and paying attention.
Thanks, Sarah. So, you know, that might imply to everybody who's on this webinar that about this gift, and I'm just going to kind of blow that up right now. And the reason why, I'm just going to nuke it. I believe that everybody, all 250 of us on this call right now, have had moments in our lives when we thought of somebody and we called them, and at that moment, that person needed to hear from us. And usually what happens after that, it's like, wow, that was awesome. And the longer we get from that time that happened, we start to doubt what happened. Nah, that was just luck. And I disagree. I believe that there's a frequency that we all have. And sometimes we're aware of it and we pay attention to it. And I think the only difference maybe between me and most people is when I think about somebody, I call them. I notice that I'm thinking about someone, so there must be a reason. So I follow up. What if the only difference between all of you and maybe me is I notice, so I take the action to call? And it goes hand in glove with what Dalen was just talking about, you know, about that sensitivity and trusting that we are connected in that way. Because at the moment, somebody needs you, and I don't know why. But I just need to call them to let them know I'm thinking about them. That's all. Just to let them know I'm thinking about them. And sometimes, and my students know that quite often when I call, I really hope nobody answers the phone because I don't have time to talk. But I just want them to know I'm thinking about them. I really don't have time. And sometimes I screw it up and somebody answers the phone and now I got to talk for half an hour. But all I'm really doing is just letting them know I'm thinking about it because I am. Thanks, Mike.
You know, Pono, I want to share that the very first time that I was attending an event, there was easily 250 plus people there, and you were speaking, and following the conference, seminar, whatever it was, I just walked by to say thank you, and all you said to me was, "I see you." And that was it. But the fact that you can be in a room full of people, connect with someone, it speaks volumes. That's all that needed to be said, right? Then the message came and everything was clear. The skies opened up and the sun shines and it just happens.
So I'm going to read something just because, thank you, Dalen. And I did see you. Just like I saw Sarah, first time we met. And that's the only thing I wanted to tell her, that I see you. And I wrote this after spending some time with Robin and her team, because, you know, I can only imagine the trauma that so many HR organizations are having when you have to lay off up to 2,500 people who are part of a family. I cannot even begin to understand the kind of sadness, anger, hurt, guilt that comes with that. And so I was so grateful that I get to have a friendship with Robin now. She just asked, you know, can you just spend some time with us? And after our first meeting, I wrote these words because she and I talked after I met with her staff. And what I wrote was, the knowledge needed to address the large and deep issues transformatively doesn't come from what most of us talk and think about regularly in our day-to-day lives, in our normal lives. That's not where it's happening. That's what's got us to where we are. That knowledge, that resource comes from a deeper reservoir within that only comes out abundantly when there is an individual who is skilled at unlocking the lid of the reservoir in others, and people are willing to trust that they have the brilliance within. And I'm just adding that because of what Dalen said. You know, I saw her and I just let her know I see her. And then she said, all this stuff started to come up. Right. Because it wasn't anything I was going to put on top of her. It was about helping to open the vault of what's actually inside of Robin's team, and Dalen and Sarah. We don't need one more book to layer on top of people with all the other hundreds that everybody's been telling us you need. It's inside.
Thank you, Pono. I'm going to ask another audience member, Cecilia, if they're able to come on screen and unmute their mic and ask their question. Hi, Cecilia.
Hi, thanks again for having me. And thank you so much for having this conversation. I really appreciate the health and wellness perspective and bringing the human aspect back to human resources. As I was creating my question and thinking about what I really want to ask you, I focused on the title about adapting together. And as we all know, this is a very stressful, intense time. And I feel that, you know, as we actually feel those things, we tend to dig in more in who we are and who we believe in. And so I ask you actually the question, you know, as our differences, political, social, financial, just as examples, grow wider every day, how do we actually begin to find the commonality that binds us as a community? Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Mike, I'm going to take that one. It takes effort. It takes effort to really look. So my good friend who graduated from law school with Robin, Randy Baltimore, when he was the COO of Hawaiian Airlines, he had just been appointed and he went to Japan and China and Korea. He came back home and he said, I need to talk to you right away. So I went down to the convention center. He says, you need to go to Asia and share aloha. And I said, why? And he said, he started to tell me about the problems that he noticed that people are struggling with in those countries. you know, the kids in Korea, how they're so driven educationally, but the kind of trauma that they're dealing with is what we're dealing with now. You know, that constant Zoom, that they're just driving, and the humanity is just kind of bleached away. But they come to Hawaii and then they can relax. And in Japan, the women have dedicated transportation systems in the morning, whether it's the trains or the subways, just for women, because groping is still happening. And children are stepping in front of trains on the first day of school, taking themselves out because they don't want to go to school. That's kindergarten to 13 years of age. Why? Bullying. Bullying at that age? They're not making babies, so their population growth is expected to decline from 125 million to 85 million in 50 years. What do you do when you lose 1/3 of your population because people are not making babies anymore? Something's wrong. Anyway, I asked Randy, you know, why? I know you guys are branding Aloha. And he's told me all of that. So, Cecilia, I had to study. You know, why do so many people come from Japan? Why are there 1.5 million people come every year? We send more people to Vegas than Japan. You know, why do in Hawaii we have 25,000 hula dancers and they have 2.7 million? You know, and you know what people naturally say? They say the easy answer, in my opinion. They love our culture. They love our heritage. The women can dress up. They can perform. They get exercise, something they can do together. You know what? That's not a fad, you know, that's a movement. Something's going on. And I had all of these meetings with these focus groups. And it wasn't until it started to come together how they, first of all, how did they get to this place? How did they get to this place where they're not making babies anymore? And I don't care what kind of tax credit the government provides. That's not going to undo how they got there. So it wasn't until I heard the president of the Rakuten Corporation, which is one of the fastest growing IT corporations and travel companies in Japan, if not the fastest, say, you know, the Japanese visitor today, they don't want to go on the tours to the museums, etc. They want to be with you at sunset, having a glass of wine, watching the sunset on the beach. They want to be with you at Makapu'u as the sun is rising. They want to be with your family as you're listening to music and having a party. And as soon as he said that, I said, oh my gosh, I just got it. So I went to Japan and I had a meeting with these 27 media writers. And you know the way they were approached before? Okay, how are you guys going to provide more lift? How are you guys going to drive up your numbers? You know, we're contracting you to write about Hawaii. But Randy asked me to go share Aloha. So I had this 1.5-hour meeting with translators and I started to share about Aloha. And I told these people, you know, our values are the same. And they thought, I think they thought I was being gratuitous. Because they just smiled, oh yeah, nice. And I just continue to elevate that. And then at one point I showed them the picture of our ahupua'a. And of course they study our culture and oh wow, the afupua'a. And they love our afupua'a. And they know it because they understand our culture and they've studied it and they've written about it. So they're telling me now about the afupua'a because I asked them, what do you know about our afupua'a? And after that, then they're so excited and elated. And I said, so what did you have? They said, we didn't have. Yeah. And then I showed them the picture of the Sato Yama. Sato is plains, Yama is the mountains, from the mountains to the plains. And the only difference between the two, Cecilia, was one has rice paddies and the other one has taro patches. And they were stunned. And I said, same. The same values that built the ahupua'a are the same values that built the Sato Yama. And the reason why I believe you folks love Hawaii so much is because who you think we are and how we live and where we live is the most beautiful thing in the world. Because we remind you of you. That when America blew you up, we blew you up. And you forgot how beautiful you were. And I have a dream that we would have a tour for you that would take you to our plantations so you can see the plight of the people who came from around the world. but then how we all married our cultures. We're not diverse, we're hybrids of diversity. And then take you to a taro patch, and then you're going to work inside, and then let's pound some poi. And oh yeah, we want to pound poi. And then we'll take you one more place. We'll take you to a Buddhist temple, and then you're going to go pound mochi. And they were stunned. You know, first of all, when I told them how beautiful they were, they all started crying except for one. And then I shared about pounding mochi, and they started crying again. And no, you think it's beautiful, we pound poi, but you're not pounding mochi. Because an American went to Japan and he instituted total quality management. So you folks have machines in your kitchens that produce the total quality, best tasting mochi in the entire world. But your children are stepping in front of trains and you're not making babies anymore. And I think the guy was an absolute idiot, Deming. Because yeah, he did the post-war miracle, but now children are stepping in front of trains. Maybe you folks need to pound mochi because it's not something you can do by yourself. One woman left, and she was the only one I wanted to talk to because she felt like she was the only one not connecting. She's taking pictures, recording, writing copious notes, and everybody else was crying. But they blocked me from getting to her when she bolted from the room. And you know what happened, Cecilia? I was just like, bomb, that's the one. And the next day when Randy Baltimore and Eric Takahata picked me up from my hotel to go to Osaka to do it again, Eric Takahata said, brother, you're on Yahoo News this morning. I said, what's Yahoo News? He says, that's Japan's CNN. Oh, everybody wakes up and they check Yahoo News. Huh. What do you mean I'm on? He said, you know that lady who left the room first yesterday? Yeah. She wrote an entire article on what she experienced yesterday, and you are all over Japan. And you know what happened? I came home and people said, great job negotiating to procure that kind of levity for Hawaii. Really? Is that what I did? No. How do we adapt? We have to search for the connection versus search for the correction. How could we connect with them in such a deep level that we take them home? See, when Randy Baltimore asked me to go to Japan and share aloha, it was not to go put my culture on the Japanese. It was through our culture. I'm going to take you home to yours, show you how beautiful your culture is based on aloha. Robin, something's coming up for you.
No, I just think that's such a beautiful story, and I think it requires just such an immense amount of presence. You know, I think that makes it that much harder right now for all of us that we're working remotely because we're on Zoom and we're on email, we have text messages, and you're thinking, okay, I gotta get ready for this next meeting, but you're back, you know, you're just not in the moment. And I think it's just such a pleasure to listen to you because it's such a great reminder that the best gift that we have for each other and for our companies and for our employees is really the ability to be present, to feel that connection.
There's a really pertinent question. I want to make sure I insert this before our time runs out. You know, you folks all obviously care, and you believe in cultivating care, and you believe in connection. The question is, how might we cultivate care and a desire to connect in upper level leaders who do not display that kind of behavior naturally, nor prioritize people connection?
You guys want to take a shot? I'll wrap.
I actually think that might be perceived by some of, I used to definitely think that. And now that I sit at the table with those upper level managers, I have to say there is a great well of compassion and care that people have. I think the struggle more than anything is how do we make it equitable for everyone? And I think that's where we trip on ourselves, and then it looks so much more transactional, and it becomes the sausage that eventually gets turned out. I think more than ever, particularly now, leaders of our companies and our communities care so deeply. I think more than anything, it's that they feel helpless in many ways because of the limitations that COVID has presented, and it's almost overwhelming. And then balancing that with the long-term sustainability of companies and the equity that we have to ensure across, you know, an entire company, it's very challenging.
Yeah, I completely agree with Robin. I also believe that what I said earlier around this disruption requires that we think about things a little bit differently. And so if a command and control philosophy got us where we are today, the idea of shifting to something that is more connected and less corrected is A, it's change, and B, it's scary for a lot of people. People in senior leadership roles, we got to where we got to by using a certain model, and changing that is scary, and it takes a lot of personal vulnerability, and it takes a lot of personal self-awareness, and that can be really, really scary. What if it doesn't go right? What if I'm not enough? What if they find out that I'm hurt and I'm scared and I'm sad and I'm not all the things that they think this office is? It's really scary. And so I think recognizing that is important. I think the more we as leaders can tell our stories and tap into their emotion, their universal emotion, helps create the safety to do that themselves. And so it's what you've heard on today's call. The more stories you can share about your own experience unlocks the beauty that's in others. And it's there, but just for some of us, it's been hidden by a lot of trauma and a lot of fear. So I guess it's a simple but not easy answer of sharing our own stories and taking the lead, going first, and not being scared to be vulnerable and go first.
I just want to say something real quick about, I agree with Robin and Sarah that what comes to mind, you know, as particularly when I speak with my clients who are business owners, that don't judge, you know, we're quick to judge on just on what we see on the outside. But for a lot of my clients who are business owners, they're carrying the burden of worrying about everybody else. And that weighs heavy on them. And it goes home with them. And sometimes they can't smile through that because it really weighs heavy on them. That if I don't figure out how to sustain this business, I'll have 5 employees, 7 employees, 10 employees, whatever the number, who are going to lose jobs, their families are going to be impacted, and that's on me. So I think sometimes we may think that people aren't struggling, but we really don't. We really don't know, right?
If I can add one thing, you know, I think the election is on everybody's mind, and whatever you think about the election, I don't know that you could watch election night coverage without being amazed by that incredible graphical representation of red and blue across the country, across the mainland. And if there was ever a more obvious example of an us versus them polarization, regardless of which side you are on, it reinforced, I think, so deeply sides. And so I think for us as leaders, challenging our thinking about just this idea of sides and the language we use around sides and us versus them, and whether it's staff versus management, whether it's remote workers versus in-office workers, language matters. And thinking about how can we create more inclusive worlds that are less polarized in just everyday ways, because we have enough polarization and it's sort of becoming our default. So as leaders, working hard to find commonality and drain pull as much as we can from that commonality, whether it's a common purpose, a common vision, the reason the company exists every day. Pull on that as much as you possibly can and resist the urge to buy into polarizations.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So they all nailed it. There was a man about 5 years ago who sent me an email, or no, a LinkedIn message, and he said that he has a company in Massachusetts that produces pharmaceuticals for cancers in Asia. And he has a laboratory established in San Diego, and he's thinking about opening up one in Hawaii. What kind of incentives are there for me who has a good business, the kind of jobs that you want to have, high paying jobs, great for your economy? What kind of incentives are there to attract me? Tax credits, permitting opportunities. Now, how we address this is very significant. I work in economic development, and it's very important that I know who we are, I know who I am when I answer that question. And so this is how I answer the question. I'm sorry, I don't do business this way. The next time you're in Hawaii, I'll be glad to meet with you. In other words, relational is relational. So I'm teaching him from the onset. Great, he replies. I'm going to be in Hawaii in a month. Can I meet with you? So I'm the first meeting he books. He comes to my office. Of course, he's Googled me. So now he's going to make, okay, we're similar. And then he says, so what kind of things are there to attract somebody like me who creates great paying jobs, great for your economy, the kind of folks that you want to have? And I said, nothing. Well, maybe you guys want to create things to attract people like me to Hawaii. No. Why should we do that for you? We don't even do that for our own people. And this guy says, man, you are straight. I said, listen, Hawaii is my home. And I love our home and I love our people. And you know what I don't have for my home? I have no exit strategy. And the reason why I'm saying that is most people who like you who come to Hawaii, they look at Hawaii like it's a project. And it's not a project, it's our home. I want you to come to Hawaii, learn to love Hawaii like I love my home. Don't flip us. Now he's saying, well, there are reasons why I should come here that would be good for me. I said, right. And you need to determine if they're good enough for you, because it's not a perfect place. And I take the good with the bad. And it's good enough for me, but you need to determine if it's good enough for you. 5 minutes before, he's trying to get me to tell him why Hawaii's good enough for him. It is so important that we know who we are and how special we are. Not better, but special. To maybe to be a tuning fork for everybody else who is starting to forget. And that's what Dalen and Sarah and Robin were talking about. We are frequency. We have frequencies. And maybe if we tune ourselves appropriately, then we're able to go and tune in with other people.
Thank you, guys. We're coming up to the end of the webinar. I wanted to do this to end, starting with Dalen, then going to Robin, Sarah, and finally Pono. Can each of you just provide closing remarks about our discussion today and the path forward?
Sure. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone for allowing me to be a part. And I want to encourage people to continue the conversation, because this is what we've done. We've opened the door to have the conversation, to collaborate. But go forward in your collaborations, in your continued conversations with the intent of positivity. Because we can all think of all the negative things. I know every day I wake up and I've got, oh my gosh, this is terrible, and this is terrible, and this is terrible. But if you start your conversations and your questions to one another about what we're going to do to create culture, start the conversation with the intent of positivity. That's what I leave you with.
Thanks, Dalen. Yeah, I do want to echo Dalen's gratitude to all of you for joining us here today. It's been such an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you, especially Pono and Sarah and Dalen. I guess I don't have any real words of wisdom except to say, I think this is a journey for many of us. It's an ongoing journey, and we've hit a big bump in the road. And I always used to think there's a blueprint. There's a right way and there's a wrong way. And I have to get on the right way. And I realize now there really isn't just two roads, and it's not just a wrong way and a right way. There is a way, and you're going to get on it whether you like it or not. And events in your life will get you to that spot. And I think the only thing I can say in closing is simply, we're all kind of on the same path together in many ways. And so the more we can sort of rely on each other and check in with each other, I think the better off we all are going to be in the long run to help us through these really hard times. Because one thing I think is certain, even though COVID is keeping us apart, it's even more important that we remain connected, whether it be through telephone calls or Teams calls. So I certainly would love to hear from any of you and your stories, because each time just hearing from Dalen and Sarah and Pono, I'm certainly learning something new, and I think we can all learn from each other.
I'd just like to close also by sharing my gratitude for being here today with these three people that I respect so much, and just being able to share from the heart, and my gratitude for them sharing from their heart as well. So, and for all of you that took time today to listen into a topic that I think is on a lot of people's mind, and you knew it was going to maybe challenge your thinking a little bit, and I really appreciate your openness and your desire to be part of the conversation. So thank you very much. Before COVID, we knew that there was an epidemic of isolation and loneliness happening. That was well documented. And I think COVID came along and on the one hand, pulled the rug out from a lot of us in a lot of different ways. But I think the silver lining of this time has been that for a lot of us who have faced incredible challenges over the last year, there's been a gift of reflection that maybe we wouldn't have had before. And so my hope is that we'll continue to take that time to reflect deeply on what it means to be connected and what it means to be connected going forward, and our role that all of us can play in helping others be seen and feel valued and releasing the amazing things that's inside of them. So again, thank you very much for everybody being on this call. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share what's on my heart.
Thanks, Sarah. There's not a person on this call or outside, if they could look back 3 to 4 generations, wouldn't find someone in your line of sponsorship who didn't do something incredibly courageous. That not done, we're not here. No one on this planet, if we could look back. Yet we think it's this moment in time. And so sometimes we think we need to author something right away rather than look at this connection that has endured for centuries. The first night that I met Sarah, the next day I received a list of questions, beautiful questions, because we do Q&As with me after, not during, because sometimes it's hard to think because I'm just this weird guy. And the very first question on that list was, what is the role of the outsider in waking the sleeping bear? One of my favorite questions of all time. What is the role of the outsider? And it came from Sarah. And it was a year ago when we were at UHA's Wellness in the Workplace Summit that there were 200 people in the room, and Sarah was on the couch sitting next to me, interviewing me as the keynote. And it was 2 weeks later that my friend Evan Leong told me he was talking with Sarah and said, how did it feel like being on stage next to Pono, kind of doing nothing? You know, just kind of ask a question and you're just like doing nothing. What does that feel like? And I just thought, Evan, you punk, what are you doing? So the next day I called Sarah and I said, Sarah, you know why I had you on stage with me? She says, I think so. And I said, it's because I was answering the question you asked 8 months ago. What is the role of the outsider in waking the sleeping bear? And I answered your question. There were 200 people in that audience who did not see you as an outsider. You're my friend. It wasn't about the answer of what is that she had to do. It's that she saw her as an outside. And the very first day I got that question, I knew the moment was going to come when I would be able to answer that question the right way, so that she knew she's not on the outside, she's on the inside. Maybe just think about that. Thank you so much, Mike, and everyone.
Thank you to all our panelists and our audience too for your time and participation today. You know, there's so many thought-provoking questions. Unfortunately, we're not able to get to all of them today. So we're going to do 5 different things for you. First of all, you noticed that there wasn't a handout today because it was a town hall forum, but there is going to be a link provided to the recording of this webinar that we'll be sending out. On top of that, first, our team at Hawaii Health at Work Alliance and UHA Health Insurance, we're going to gather the remaining questions and create a Q&A document, which we're going to post on our resource hub. So we'll be notifying you when that document's ready, and we'll provide you the link to the resource hub so you can access the document. Second, we're going to use some of the questions as future webinar topics, so stay tuned for that. Third, we're going to be launching a new podcast, which we're really excited in 2021. And we'll make sure to include pertinent questions on our podcast topics as well. And fourth, we plan to continue this conversation on our LinkedIn page, HHAWA Hawaii Wellness Leaders Group. So be on the lookout for that link as well. Lastly, we always strive to improve and exceed your needs. So we're going to send you a survey to help us evaluate the webinar. So please do. And so to everybody, be well and stay safe. Mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha, everyone. Mahalo.
Thank you.